Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Tuesday, July 9th, 2019. Let's get right on with it and talk about what's happening in the tropics. The big story, Invest Area 92L, now tucked away in the northeast Gulf of Mexico, forecast by the National Hurricane Center to eventually become a tropical cyclone. And that is just the general definition for tropical depression, a tropical storm, or a hurricane, or a major hurricane. Those are all tropical cyclones. And so, this may just become a depression. I say just. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It could become a hurricane. It's hard to say for sure. A couple things going against this. It is July, and the climatology for July in this area is generally favored, but it's still rather difficult to get hurricane development in the month of July. That's why we do not see a very big uptick in activity in July. It's usually not until the end of August, with the exception of very, very busy years like 2005 as an example. But that was an outlier, an anomaly. This year is not like that year. You notice this too, way out in the southeast Atlantic Ocean. Is that, at least it's the southeast corner of the map. The southeast corner of the North Atlantic. That's a good way to put it, north of the equator. Not labeled as anything, no outlook, no nothing, but that's an interesting feature. There's definitely weak low pressure here. It's still pretty dry out that way, the mid-levels of the atmosphere and so forth. Saharan air layer influence, not much in the way of energy. Well, there is in the ocean, but the atmosphere is kind of dry, and so these things typically don't develop this time of year. You notice another tropical wave here, another system moving through the eastern Caribbean, and then this one back here, as I mentioned. If it were about a month later to 5 weeks later, then that might try to develop. But the focus right now is going to be on 92L in the Gulf of Mexico. So let's take a look at the wide shot here. We put all that into motion, and you can see the frontal boundary right through here stretched across thousands of miles of the Atlantic Basin. Convergence along that front, bringing shower and thunderstorm activity, prolific lightning, heavy rain, all that good stuff in parts of the Carolina coastal area along Highway 17 corridor, back to portions of inland Georgia, as you can see right in here. And then over the Gulf of Mexico, there's 92L. We'll take a look at that on a close-up in just a moment. And you can also see, just as well as I can, there's just some very broad turning with this system. Out in the far eastern Atlantic, another tropical wave here, but you can also see all this dry air as evidenced by the lack of overall convection or thunderstorm activity, just not much of it, because you get this easterly jet that comes off and it ejects these large masses of dry particulate-laden air, and that's, the way it goes in July. Nothing unusual about that. All right, so let's get rid of that tab and look at a close-up here. Again, these are great products from Levi Cowan and his website at tropicaltidbits.com. Pretty big mess here in the Gulf of Mexico. Look at the convection blowing up here over the Florida Panhandle. No real easy way to discern whether or not a low-level circulation is forming. It's still too early. We need a little bit more time for this to develop, but the vorticity signature with this, and we've talked about this a lot lately, has, for the most part, moved off the energy into the northeast Gulf, but you can see overall there's just a pretty big abundance of energy, kind of shaped like a boomerang down there, and that has to concentrate and focus. It's still elongated and kind of weird shaped. It's not focusing just yet, similar to what we see out here, in the Atlantic with that front. All that energy is stretched out over thousands of miles, and this isn't thousands of miles, but it's not bundled yet either. So the low levels of the atmosphere, the mid levels, and the upper levels all have to turn cyclonically about a low pressure area to get efficient transfer of heat, to create these thunderstorm towers that develop, and it releases the heat in the atmosphere, that latent heat that gets built up from the very warm 30 degrees Celsius, 29 Celsius ocean temperatures down here. it's all a process, and that's going to take some time for it to get going. But by the weekend, we could be looking at a big disaster in the making for this area, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in just a moment. Notice, too, over here, a little bit of energy vorticity signature showing up from the system well to the south of the Cabo Verde Islands right there. Used to be called the Cape Verde Islands. And again, that's not going to amount to anything. It's just interesting to watch these systems ride along. Oh, and by the way, you can see all that energy along the intertropical convergence zone. That shows up very nice as well. All right. So a couple things I wanted to point out. We need to really think about 92L and what it eventually becomes, presumably Tropical Storm Barry at some point. On the bigger picture here, that instead of, okay, how strong is it going to get? We all want to know that. I understand that. I mean, in my business, I want to know too. It helps me decide what equipment I'm going to take and so forth. I get that. But let's not lose sight of the other hazards that we're going to have to face with this system. All right? So right along the coast, the potential for high wind, definitely heavy rain and coastal flooding as well at the coast. And then the potential for heavy rain inside this green area. This is from the Weather Prediction Center, the WPC. Their days 3 through 7 U.S. hazards outlook. All right, so this system, as it organizes over here and moves across and does whatever it's going to do, is going to bring, in terms of wind, I say does what it's going to do, so much attention over the past, 30, 50, 100 years is placed on, what category is it going to be? Where's it going to go? Everybody, when they talk about it, they're talking about the center and the core or the eye. And you know what? Michael really taught me better than any hurricane, well, maybe Charlie in 2004. But Michael was a reminder as it came in down here last October that your really intense, well-organized hurricanes, that's when you say, well, where is it going? Because it really mattered in terms of who got, I don't want to say annihilated, because there's still some structure standing, but you get what I'm saying. The core of an intense hurricane really matters when it's an intense hurricane in terms of who's going to see the strongest wind, and in the case of Mexico Beach, the most violent storm surge down here from Michael. But the center hit here. Cedar Key had storm surge. St. Mark's had storm surge. The places that I talk about in my documentary that I feature, East Point, elsewhere, Carabel, Port St. Joe, they had storm surge. The worst storm surge, of course, is where the core was. My point, you think about tropical systems. When you think about them, I need you to think about all of the impacts that they bring. And a very deadly and damaging, life-changing impact is that word right there, rain. All right, look at what happened up in the D.C. area up here yesterday with all that heavy rain. People still driving through it, rescues, etc. It's like we never learn. I don't get it. Maybe it's just human nature, but I am here to present information that ultimately will help to keep you alive. That's part of my job. The other part of it is to show you what I do. When I go and I set up equipment, go in the field, do these updates. There's a lot of people that do video updates, but I take it on the road and we go in the field and we set up equipment. So the other part is that part, the field mission part. We'll get to that, eventually. Right now, I see a lot of talk about how strong. That's wind and pressure when you talk about intensity. But what about how much rain is it going to dump over areas that could see up to 20 inches of rain from this system, that have already had record-breaking, both in the amount of flooding and the duration, the length of time, all through this region in here, bad flooding. And this is going to add to that, especially in the lower Mississippi Valley region, the lower Mississippi River Basin as a whole, Atchafalaya River area, okay? You need to be thinking of it larger than, the wind doesn't seem too bad, whatever. it matters, but it doesn't matter. What's going to matter more, think about all of the people that live inside of this polygon, if you will. And that's what that is, right? It's a polygon. Think about everybody that lives inside of this area that I'm shading in yellow. That's the area that the WPC, I feel like a kindergartner here, coloring in. You get the idea. By the way, if you know about graphic arts, that's the stroke, and the yellow is the fill color. But everybody in that area, for real, big flooding potential coming up. Lives, property, all at stake. So please think of it like that this will be a significant event. Yes. How much wind and storm surge will it bring? I don't know. How much rain will it bring? I don't know the exact amount, but it is going to bring a lot. That much I can guarantee you because, look at it. It's already set into motion. And the water temperatures underneath all this and the upper ocean heat content are enough to generate a lot of rain, and it's going to be fairly slow moving. So before I go look at the models, and I look at the models too, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but the model guidance is one thing, the result is an entire different thing, and this is going to result in tremendous rainfall that'll make travel difficult, preparation difficult, it'll flood people. People are going to drive through those floodwaters in their vehicles, all that nasty stuff. And we got to stop that. We really do. So please be aware of that and have that on the forefront of your mind if you live down here along the I-10 corridor and about 200 miles north of it. Okay? Do that for me, please. That's what I want you to do. All right. So there's the vorticity signature once again. That's the player, if you will. The chess piece that's most important. Now let's go look at, sorry, I already looked at that. So now let's compare the GFS versus the Euro. I've got both these panels open here, these tabs from Tropical Tidbits, and I can scroll through and just kind of show you what's what. This is the initial condition, and from the 12Z run this morning, this is the area that you should watch right through here. All right? So let me just scroll through this, and you'll see what happens. You notice it turns into that big ball of energy. See that? Let me take my telestration away, and we can see it better. There you go. Well, come on, Mark. I've used this. It's great software. I'm not slamming it. It's just my knowledge of how all the hotkeys work. So there you go. Landfall, you want to focus on landfall, maybe Saturday night into Sunday. We'll worry about that more later. You see how that does a little wiggle there? Anyway, a lot of subtleties here. So, the energy comes down 24 hours out. That's tomorrow. There's 48, 72 right there, south of Morgan City, Louisiana. But that's, the energy. Look at the core right in here, the center of it. Won't call it a core yet. But all this other stuff, that's energy too. These little areas of vorticity. To me, that represents energy in the atmosphere, and meteorologically, there's a whole nother explanation for it. I am a physical geographer. I'm an earth scientist. I am not a meteorologist, so I cannot tell you the mathematical equations behind what these little spokes mean. Somebody can, but that's not what I do. I look at it, and I know enough to know, oh, that means energy. And, it almost looks like spiral bands. Wouldn't you agree? It sure does. And that's going to mean rainfall. That's the bottom line. What's the impact? Rain. Rain, rain, rain. I need you to think about rain here. Because this is going to dump a lot of rain. Baton Rouge, New Orleans perhaps, and there could be onshore flow. And you get surge piling into that area. This is going to be a big, big problem. Rainfall. All right? So there we go. So let's park this at about hour 96. Now let's go visit the European from the same time frame. 12Z run. 850 millibar field of the atmosphere. The atmosphere has layers. So let's see what the Euro shows. Now, unfortunately, the Euro only gives us 24-hour increments. So if I scroll, it'll be like, gone. So we've got to use the little arrows here that fantastic Levi Cowan has set up. We all appreciate it, Levi. And by the way, Levi is also on Patreon. I had my little Patreon ad at the beginning of today's video. Got to promote how I fund my work. Levi is as well, so throw some coin his way. And plus, he's in school at FSU. Come on, you got to support the guy. And he has done some amazing things, and we're going to look at that. So here we go. This is the initial condition. There's 24, 48, 72, 96. So let's look at the differences. GFS at 96, a little bit west and south. Euro at 96, a little bit more north and east. Both of them, though, show a fairly formidable system in terms of wind and presumably pressure. We would deduce that later. That's what recon will be for. The models are guidance. That's called model guidance, numerical guidance, not model, this is what's going to happen, or whatever. It's guidance. It's not model, etched in stone, okay, model guidance. So the guidance suggests, as of this morning's runs, from this model, the GFS, this model, which is the ECMWF, the Euro, and the UK Met, the United Kingdom Met model, and others. There's so many models and so many variations of models. It's mind-numbing. The bottom line is today's trend, stronger, deeper system, more wind, more storm surge for the coastal areas, and that doesn't change the rain for down here, though. The rain is going to be absolutely incessant, and I'm going to talk about that. You're going to get sick of it, perhaps, but we saw, Houston with Harvey, North Carolina last year with Florence, Allison in 2001, the 2016 tropical low that rode along the I-10 corridor inland. Look at this. Everybody said if that had been 100 miles further south, well, this could be your 100 miles further south. 3 years later, it was 2016, right, where Lafayette and areas in Louisiana were just, Baton Rouge were just absolutely annihilated, and that is true, from rain, carpet bombed by just incessant rainfall from a non-named, it wasn't even a depression, it was a tropical low, all that convergence in energy pulling in moisture from the Gulf, rode over the I-10 corridor inland, so it never developed the wind component to deserve a name. Yet, it caused billions of dollars in damage, and people are still suffering from that even today. So the update overall is a little shorter than yesterday, I guess, because we're starting to fine-tune it, so to speak. We know something's probably going to develop, very high chance of it. Now we need to talk about what to expect, so I will focus on that more from here on out. A couple things. So tomorrow morning, I'll do the update in the morning. I'm going to be leaving Wilmington, North Carolina. That's where I live. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to go to Atlanta, Georgia first, as the first leg of my journey. And then from there, somewhere along the Gulf Coast, wherever I need to be. I don't know where that's going to be yet. I will take with me several of our unmanned camera units, backed up with our GoPro cameras, 2 weather stations that we can attach to the concrete portions of bridges and overpasses. I am very excited about that. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of that was funded by this right here. Absolute truth. Our patrons, and a patron is somebody who helps something happen. Patrons of the art, producers make movies. Well, patrons in the crowdfunding world help creators to do amazing things. And in this instance, I'm literally putting equipment out starting later in the week. I just don't know where yet. That's funded by these patrons, all right, on Patreon. So just to give you an idea, we are literally going to be putting that to work. So thank you, patrons. And if you want to become a patron, go for it. You get some awesome things in return, too. It's not just, hand me money and I go do stuff. You are the benefactor, just like with a play back in Shakespeare times, or when patrons fund artworks to be commissioned, you get to benefit from that. But yeah, it's all tied in here, full circle. I will be putting out equipment that was funded by those patrons. So I'll do an update in the morning. Don't know exactly where I'm headed yet. It's all fluid, literally. And we'll just have to see what happens. Now, a couple of interesting things. I'm going to have a live feed coming from the vehicle. I've got a rental vehicle, my Chevy Tahoe that I've used for so many years. You've heard me talk about it before. Is no longer operational. And so if you have a Chevy dealer and you want to donate a vehicle, hit me up. Be glad to talk to you about that. But in the meantime, because of our patrons, I'm able to rent something. And so, and I mean that sincerely. That's where I get the money from. That's how I fund it. I've got a Dodge 1500 truck, heavy, roomy, a packet full of gear, including live feed through one of our Nest cams that I've installed in there. You'll see. It's going to be pretty cool. And we will rebroadcast that on YouTube and do some really neat things with it. So as long as I've got a signal, and yes, there'll be times when it drops, blah, 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 blah. But most of the time I'll be up, and you'll be able to see and hear as I travel. We'll start that tomorrow afternoon. All right? All right, that is it for me. Thanks, as always, for tuning in from your side of the screen, whatever screen that might be. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk to you again early tomorrow morning.